What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and I promise I am not recording this immediately after finishing my last episode. I promise. I don't know what you're talking about. All right, so we are looking at a random magic card. I've not seen this before, just this moment, and it's fresh off the dome, unscripted, unedited, as always here on Overthinking MTG. Let's go ahead and take a look. Today we are looking at Wall of Diffusion. It looks like this was from Tempest Remastered, so presumably it was originally from Tempest, which, by the way, baller set. I love that they did a Tempest Remastered. That's how freaking great that set was. As I'm looking through, I have a bunch of shoeboxes of amazing cards, and as I'm flipping through, 90% of the time when I see that little thundercloud that is the Tempest logo, I'm just jazzed. 90% of the time I look at that card and just man, what is this? What does this do? Anyway, that set was fire. I love the fact that they brought it back. Anyway, so Wall of Diffusion. It is a 0/5 creature type wall for 1 and a red. It has Defender because it was an old school wall. Wall of Diffusion can block creatures with shadow, as though Wall of Diffusion had shadow. That rules. I love this. If you're wondering what the heck is shadow, shadow is shadow's weird. Shadow is, that's the thing actually. Shadow is weird only because it's another style of evasion. In reality, it actually makes a lot of sense and is pretty easy to understand. Ultimately, what it comes down to is creatures that have shadow can only block other creatures that have shadow, but also they can only be blocked by other creatures that have shadow. So imagine if flying creatures couldn't block ground creatures and vice versa. That's shadow. So if a creature has shadow, it's effectively unblockable, but it also cannot block. 90% of the time nowadays, because shadow has not been reprinted, it hasn't been brought back in any meaningful way, so there are very few instances where shadow really exists, aside from a couple of old school legacy decks, or people who really are enjoying some commander action, who are getting funky with some old stuff, because there were maybe a dozen cards in black and white that had shadow. In black there were the Dauthi was the name. So if you do Dauthi, if I'm not mistaken. And the only reason I know that is because I actually have a handful of them, because I tried to make shadow work in a couple of my decks back in the day. There's one card actually specifically that I really want to figure out a place for, because for the life of me I can't find it. It's called Dauthi Trapper. I would highly recommend you look that up. Maybe I'll do an episode on it one of these days, because I haven't figured out the right place for it yet. But anyway, that's another story for another day. So the thing that makes shadow, there are these pretty rare little instances of shadow. So there was the Dauthi in black, and there was a white faction that for the life of me I can't remember. I can't remember their name, and you can actually see, Soltari. Soltari was the name, and the only reason I know that is because it's actually in the flavor text right here, and this image is showing a Soltari individual it's a humanoid race. It's the white race that has shadow, kind of slipping along alongside what looks like a wall, and it looks like they're being stopped by some kind of small, I don't know, there's a small black orb that this Soltari individual is staring into, and I'm not sure exactly what we're seeing here. It looks almost like it's some kind of, it's some kind of obstacle that doesn't look particularly impressive, but they are stopped dead in their tracks. So clearly they can't progress further. Yeah, this is a very weird wall. I don't really know what to make of it, because the object looks like maybe a large BB, or it looks like almost like a big, almost like a big jawbreaker that's just black, if that makes sense. And I know that really doesn't, but it doesn't look like much, but it seems to be enough to stop them, if I'm interpreting this art correctly. I wouldn't be surprised if this artwork was actually originally intended for a Soltari warrior, or a Soltari character of some kind, but they ended up moving it to the Wall of Diffusion, probably because after the art direction, that I wouldn't be surprised if after they did the art, something got changed around in production. Now, that said, that's all a guess. I don't know. I could be mistaken, but that's my guess. That's the other thing that I find absolutely insane. when Wizards is putting together a Magic set, they are crafting a set of over 200 cards, all of which have to interconnect with one another. And on top of that, they have to tell a cohesive story through their artwork. So you have to coordinate dozens, if not hundreds of artists to put together different pieces, all of which follow a similar style, a similar guideline, and can tell a cohesive story that fits the narrative as part of, the amount of cat herding that has to go on at Wizards of the Coast to make all that happen is insane. And then when you top that off, when you think of artwork, there are creators, there are brilliant artists who have been commissioned to produce these pieces, and they do, and submit them to Wizards of the Coast. But then what happens if a card gets scrapped? If a card gets cut for power level reasons or because of balance reasons, but they've already commissioned the artwork for it. If it's late in development when something gets botched, then all of a sudden the artwork is just left. My understanding is, I've heard rumors anyway, that there are just files of slush art that Wizards has commissioned over the years that never actually made it to print. That's amazing. Like, that is fascinating. And I would love to get it. Like, I would absolutely adore a chance to look through those files and just see what's out there. If anything, actually, what I think would be the greatest time would be to take one of those pieces, one of those pieces of artwork, and try to figure out and design a card based on it. And that has to be happening right now, right? Like, there have to be designers in there looking at art that they've already commissioned, because that's an opportunity to save the company money. And actually, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of those pieces end up in core sets, because that's something that I really noticed with the core set 21. There's a lot of artwork that is clearly unique to specific planes. There is very clearly... there are a couple that are very clearly showing like Volshok from Mirrodin, or a couple, images that are clearly from Ravnica, or clearly from Amonkhet. But the core set itself doesn't have a cohesive story, so they can get away with it. I would be shocked if the majority of that artwork wasn't commissioned for various sets over the years that they didn't have a place for, and they thematically fit these cards, and so they could reassign them and shuffle them in, because they didn't have the hurdle of working a narrative story on a single plane in that particular set, which would just be efficient. Like, that's just good business. And so that's a guess based on what I've seen. I hope that's true, because if so, I would imagine as an artist, it would probably be really frustrating to spend a couple of days working full-time hours to produce a piece of art. Because that's the other thing. When we're looking at a Magic card, it's this little strip of paper that is super small, and the artwork is only it's less than half of the face of that thing. But for every single physical Magic card, for every single unique piece of art, there is a full-size rendering of it somewhere. Whether that's digital, whether that's oil-based, whether that's watercolor, there is a full-size, complete piece of art that someone put their emotional energy into and put their hours into to create and breathe life into. And that exists out there in the world. That's amazing. And to think that artists are putting in that work. Now, I understand these are professionals. I understand that they're doing a job. I understand that these aren't necessarily super personal pieces, but at the same time, some of them might be. Like, I know a lot of artists base their figures off of themselves or people they love and people they know. And you'll notice as you look at certain artists, there are motifs that appear throughout their pieces, and there's no way that doesn't mean something to them. If you've created anything artistic, you understand that, at least in my experience, you can't help but put a little part of yourself in it. And so the idea that artists are putting themselves into these pieces and they're just collecting dust at Wizards, I love the fact that they can get dusted off. I love the fact that they can pull them out of the archives. And Wizards saves money. This artist sees their work get out into the world and get published. I dig that. I think that's really great. And so I think we need to see that happen more often. And so I believe that may be the case with the Wall of Diffusion, just because the artwork doesn't really seem to match the card quite right, unless it is a thematic leap or a reference to something that's going on in this world that I don't know, which is very possible. It could be. So there is some flavor text, and maybe that'll shed some light onto this. So the injury was being caught between this world and our own. The insult was to find walls within. And that was Lina, Saltari Emissary. Ooh, okay. So I got to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what, like from a lore perspective, how Shadow works. I don't understand exactly what the story is with these Shadow folks. However, this sheds some light on that. So the Shadow creatures are caught between worlds. They are creatures from another dimension who are, or another plane perhaps, who have partially phased into existence. And so they have some corporeal effect on this world to the point where they can attack and block each other. But they're untouchable by those who are native of this particular world. And so the idea that something from this other plane that they've been caught, halfway in between, can touch them. I can imagine that would be very frustrating, because that's the one thing you had. That's the one benefit, the one ability, the one strength. And I would imagine that being stuck between worlds would be a really unpleasant place to be. And so any benefit, any good that you can pull from it, anything that you can lean on as a strength, to have that taken from you must be really frustrating. So I can see where they're coming from here. This would suck. Yeah, and it's a 0/5 for 2, and actually that blocks most of the Shadow creatures that I can think of anyway. Actually, I think that blocks all of them. Like, the Shadow monsters, at least that I'm aware of, or the Shadow beings that I'm aware of, are pretty small. Like, it's a lot of weenies. So, yeah, that would stink. But the other part that's really cool about this, though, with Wall of Diffusion, is that it can still block creatures that do not have Shadow. It's similar to Reach in that regard, that this can block anything. It's 0/5. Now, it doesn't have Reach, so it can't block flyers, but if you're going up against Shadow, it can block it just fine. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, Shadow's a fascinating mechanic, because if you have ways of granting Shadow to other beings, to other creatures, you can actually make it so that they can't block. Anyway, it's fascinating stuff. Shadow is a really cool mechanic. I can see why they went away from it. I don't necessarily think they should bring it back, although at the same time, I think they can get away with it. I mean, they brought back phasing in this last set, and so I don't know, why not bring back Shadow, I guess, is at this point. I think it could be fun. Anyway, so this has been Wall of Diffusion. Interesting stuff. Heck of a tangent. But that's what we do here. So, Magic art. I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I hope you're having a fantastic day. You can catch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhox42. I'm also on Twitter @hox42. And you can catch me on YouTube if you are listening to this on a podcast. And if you're watching this on YouTube, it's available as a podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out. You guys are the absolute best, and I will catch you next time.